On the 14th of October, Shirley Manson, the singer from Garbage, went viral on social media after she spoke out on stage while being on tour in the US. And here's a clip.
The average musician makes $12 a month on Spotify. They're sleeping in their vans, they're holding down numerous jobs, and they're playing their guts out every night. And the fact that they are not even able to sell a record, and it's taken from them by rich on streaming platforms who get paid royally, by record labels who get paid royally, by ticket masters who get paid royally, by merch companies who get paid royally. The list goes on and on and on. There's accountants, there's lawyers, they all getting paid, except for the musician. So I bring this up tonight because you are the ones who will lose out on generations of esoteric, risk-taking, creative, adventurous weirdos.
Many musicians share this clip, including myself. I thought she was absolutely bang on, and it was important that she spoke out. But while this seems like an obvious statement for most musicians, it doesn't seem to be so obvious for everybody else. When I meet people for the first time and they learn about my job being a professional drummer, one of the first questions they usually ask is, how does this work for you guys financially? You know, touring with your bands. Well, the short answer is, it doesn't. And this is when they usually look at me with big eyes of confusion and they simply change the subject. After speaking out on social media recently about some issues within the music industry and the business model, including the streaming and Spotify and AI, I was told, and I quote, "Stop playing the victim like all those other musicians and stop giving us lectures. Unless you are an expert in economics, you don't have the right to lecture us." And although I can mention quite a few things wrong with this statement, including the argument of authority as being the only valid one, and that in fact the authority of an economics expert would hardly help when it comes to the reality of being a professional musician, it struck me even more that this statement came from a musician himself. And while I do believe that most professional musicians don't have this ignorance about their own condition, whether both economics and societal, I do believe that most people have no idea how this business works simply because we just don't talk about the facts. Musicians seem to only complain about the consequences of things that have been going on for a long time. And I can't blame the public for not really knowing how this works. On one side, you see glamorous stars, singers earning millions or billions and being extremely successful and rich from their art. On the other side, you have some whiny little musicians complaining about not getting enough money from streams on Spotify. So, which one is it? I can see how some musicians speaking out could seem like they're only whiny people playing victims, but they have no idea how to run a business, or maybe they just don't have enough talent, right? That's what would be kind of logical. But is it really the case? Or are there some facts we just don't talk about? Well, in this video, I'm gonna try to talk about the facts. I'm gonna try to put some light under this weird and awkward and apparently very taboo question of how much money do musicians make? The first thing you'll notice is that weirdly, no musicians will be happy to talk about how much they get paid, whether it is in teaching or in live performance context or studio recording sessions. So you can imagine that this video was not easy to make. In fact, it took me twice longer than expected in order to gather the data necessary to get some conclusions. All musicians seem secretive about it, except if they have an online coaching course to sell, then weirdly they show off about earning 6 figures a year from YouTube or streaming or whatever, which makes you wonder why they bother selling an online course, to be honest. But showing off about your pay is not something you do in any job, right? But musicians seem extra secretive about this. So it got me curious, why so secretive? Of course, the primary reason is the same as for any other job. We don't really want to appear like we've negotiated our job badly. So we don't really want to talk about it to not appear unprofessional and unable to negotiate. But I actually think that the main reason is the fact that we live in a fake happiness culture, meaning that we don't have to be happy, we have to appear happy. And well, the same goes with wealth. We don't have to be rich, but we've got to appear rich, because wealth is associated with success. And the music industry has not been spared to this. Therefore, if you don't earn enough, or at least if you don't appear to earn enough, people will think that you're not that good at your job and you're therefore not worth hiring. So although some musicians will struggle financially, or they will be in need of another job, they won't really talk about it. And some will actively hide it, as they will be scared of looking unsuccessful and therefore unprofessional. As I said, it's not important to be rich, but it is important to appear rich. So most musicians will actually do the exact opposite, and they will post about their tour, about their gigs, about their session, usually inflating the facts, or at least not really mention or make it look like it is either unpaid or badly paid, or the conditions of touring are awful, or not saying that all tours are like this. Of course, I would have left the music industry a long time ago if it was the case. But what I'm 100% sure is that every single artist has done that in their career more than they'd like to admit. In fact, some cases of bad pay or awful touring conditions and mistreatment and manipulations of artists are constantly coming out. Recently, there has been Dogma, that's made the news with it, and recently before that was Cradle of Filth. And unfortunately, those cases are not isolated, they just keep on coming. And keep in mind, this is not a critique. Actually, we can't blame artists for doing this. Unfortunately, although it is a toxic belief, and I don't need to go on and explain that this phenomenon is absolutely horrendous for mental health, it is based on real consequences. I know far too many cases of artists who are not taken seriously because they have a full-time or part-time job on the side of their playing activity. In fact, I was victim of this myself. Living in London in 2021-2023 was a very rough time. It was post-pandemic, there was a lot less work, and we faced a 20% rent increase in an already way too expensive city. So, for the first time in years, I found myself in need of a full-time job. Although I had been a full-time professional player for years before that, and despite the fact that I was still working within the music industry, and this was not a bad job, I saw quite a few key people within the music industry taking me less seriously because I had a full-time job. And now that I am back to being a full-time musician, this image sticks. So not only it can make you look unprofessional while you're having another job to sustain your musical activity, it can also affect your career at the very long term, even when you're back to being a full-time musician. I think that overall, this treatment is completely unfair. Firstly, because success, especially within the arts, can be measured in countless different ways than wealth. We can think of countless artists who made major contributions to their fields but were not wealthy. But most importantly, this judgment is completely outdated. The reality of our industry has changed significantly, but we still judge musicians on the same criteria as for the industry which died in the 90s, and it has significantly worsened year after year until now. The issue with this whole I must look wealthy to look successful to be hired is that we end up not talking about the issue. It is actually the main reason why we can't really do anything about it. How can you solve a problem that on an individual level, everyone is trying actively to look like it's not there? And so the musicians complaining about this on social media do look like whiny victims who have no idea how to run a business. But after the research for this video, I can affirm this. The current business model of the music industry is completely broken. And without actually willing to always bring bad news in my videos, it is worse than you think. So I'm gonna come in like a wrecking ball. And I'm gonna start talking about the facts. But first, unfortunately, a little disclaimer. What I learned while gathering information for this video is that another reason why we don't talk about the fact is because it is difficult to put them back in context. Not just it is difficult to calculate inflation, but also the lifestyle and the cost of living in general. And it varies massively with the geography. So for this reason, I've only gathered data for the UK and the US, which I believe are the two leading countries when it comes to Western music industry, and this is the only music industry I can discuss. But obviously, leave in the comment the situation in your country, because I believe this might be radically different, and I think it's time to talk about it. Another point is that DJs are considered as musicians within the global data I gathered for musicians nowadays. And without sounding disrespectful to any DJ, I don't think it's wise to compare them to musicians, as their earning is considerably higher for the amount of work, preparation and investment needed. So this means that the data of musicians today has probably been artificially brought up because of this. And then another point very important to keep in mind is that, like every other profession, between the higher pay and the lower pay, there's usually a massive gap. And although this is a minority earning a lot, it can also bring the average up. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any median data for salaries, so I had to deal with averages, which is a bit less accurate and can be brought up as well with the higher paid within the field. And in fact, as you know, I was told I couldn't give any lectures about this subject unless I was an expert in economics, so I had the help of an international economics and finance expert who reviewed all of my data and made sure I was dealing with it the right way. And so now we can move on. In an interview recently, Dave Weckl, and if you don't know him, he is like one of the best and most hired drummers over the past 3 decades. He talks about how much he used to earn while on tour in 1983. He earned $4,500 a week. In today's money, it would be $14,595. For a top player with about the same age as what he was back then, with roughly the same experience, working with roughly the same level of artists, nowadays they would be paid between £4,000 to £5,000 a week in average. Again, I'm working with averages. So about the same pay as it was in 1983. With the inflation taken into account, it is 3 to 4 times less money than before. And I will let that sink in for a minute. So after hearing this, it got me curious. How bad is it today in comparison to the 1980s and 1990s? Because after all, this is on criteria of that era that we judge musicians today, right? And in order to compare pears with pears and apples with apples, here is what I got. I compared a full-time musician working within the US in 1990 and in 2025. And all of the amounts will be stated in today's money, so already adjusted for the inflation. The average salary for a full-time musician working in the US in 1990s was, in today's money, $56,982. Today, it is $44,850. And that is including someone who's working probably in different fields within the music industry, not just the one job, right? As we know, we need several activities within the music industry in order to have a monthly salary. So it's $4,748 per month in 1990, and it is $3,740 today. Now, when it comes to the gigging industry, obviously, as you know, there is sometimes massive difference within one day to another. The same gig can pay twice more the next day. But one figure that kept coming back is that for a regular, easy to get gig in 1990, it was paid, on average, $225. Today, it is between $150 to $200, depending which data you're going to take. For the touring industry, if we go into the highest rates, then we're looking at, according to Dave Weckl and people of that caliber within that industry at that time, it was roughly around $2,000 per day in the touring industry, while the roughly same status and same gig would get you now about on average between $1,000 to $1,200 per day. When it comes to music teachers, which is the main regular income for musicians, I checked the average pay for someone working within a music school, so not necessarily expert private teaching, but more on the public teaching wages. It used to be on average $37 per hour, and now it is $30 per hour. Again, I'm just saying that all of these figures are in today's money. Inflation has been calculated already. So most people will say, yeah, but back then things were more expensive than today. Well, let's check if that's true. So the first thing I checked was the rent. And I thought that most musicians back then, and even still today, usually live in a big city in which there is a lot of music and where a lot of the industry is located. So I decided to check the average rent for a 2-bed apartment in LA back then and today. So back then it was $1,100 per month. Today it is $2,760. Then you have the bills. Usually the bills were included in the rent in that $1,100. Today we have to add an average of $200 extra for the bills. Then if you wanted to do, I don't know, a little dinner at an inexpensive restaurant, back then it would be $37. Today it is $54. And then finally, if you wanted to buy a house, because, well, it's, I think, the objective of many people and many professionals. I actually got the price for a median house within the whole of the US. So no matter where you buy in the US, this is the median house price. In 1990, it was $142,000. Today, it is $410,800. Then finally, well, you need to get trained, right? So how much would it cost for a music degree back then and today? I checked the average cost for a music degree. So this takes into account the price of all of the schools within the US, not just the renowned and maybe more expensive schools such as Berkeley and so on. The music degree back in the days was $12,000 in average. Today, it is $70,000. So the conclusion we can take from this is that globally, the income lowered in every single field mentioned. So the performance and the teaching. And the cost of living is higher today than then. So there is a bigger gap between the salary and the cost of living. We can also notice that the decrease of pay is mostly observed within the gigging industry more than the teaching, but there is also a significant decrease within the teaching too. And so the deal of becoming a professional musician is completely different today than it was in 1990. However, we seem to use the same criteria to judge whether a musician is professional or not today. So while asking around to reference check my data and see if, well, what I found online and on global data actually matched the experience of my friends and friends of friends, I realized that the reality of being a professional musician was considerably different in the US than in the UK. And I didn't imagine it would be this different. So I thought I would also bring a comparison of being a professional musician within the UK and the US in this video, just to show that the reality of the job can be considerably different, even though we are, again, judged on the same criterias and we kind of work within the same industry. But whether you're in one country or another, you won't have the same experience. So for this comparison, I gathered information for full-time musicians working in the UK and in the US in 2025, and every amount has been changed to dollars, so we can compare again pairs with pairs and apples with apples. So the average salary per year for a full-time musician working within the US, we know it already, is $44,850. For the UK though, it is $27,000, which per month averages to $3,740, as we know, and $2,250 per month. And that's where I'd like to point out that the minimum wage in each country can be quite interesting here. The minimum wage in the US for a 35-hour week is $1,218 per month, while in the UK it is for a 35-hour week, $2,330 per month. So yeah, musicians in the UK earn on average less than the minimum wage. Now, when it comes to touring, although touring is international, there is actually a difference of pay there too. And an average touring weekly rate, again, this is where figures might vary a lot. So if you do earn more than this average I'm giving, just don't show off about it. That's good. You're paid well. Good for you. If you get paid a lot less, well, then it is, I guess, the reality of a lot. Again, that's how averages work. But on average, touring musicians within the US earn per week $4,500 if they, I guess if it's the good level touring and a lot of shows. As for the UK, it is $2,470 on average per week. So almost half. And on the highest end, again, we talked about the highest end of touring on a daily rate figures. I talked about $1,200 for the US, and we're looking at $670 for the UK. Like, that's a good pay for the UK. If you earn this, then you're probably touring with some of the biggest artists within the UK. Again, I can see that people will say, yeah, but the cost of living is way higher in the US than in the UK. Well, let's check if that's true. The average rent in LA, as I mentioned, for a 2-bed apartment is $2,760, while the price in London is roughly the same, the same kind of prices, by the way. Well, the average rent is $2,900 for the same apartment. Then the basic utilities for 85 square meter apartment, as I mentioned, was roughly around $200 per month for the US, while it is $330 for the UK per month. A meal, just not even a dinner, just a regular meal at an inexpensive restaurant is on average $25 in the US, while it is $26.50 in the UK. So it is roughly the same, but a little bit more in the UK. Roughly, I think the food has shown to be a little bit more in the US than in the UK, but that increase was almost insignificant. And that's why I didn't gather all the data for that. Then again, if you want to buy a house, the median house price in the whole of the US was $410,800, while in the UK it is $394,000. So very expensive too, but a tiny bit less expensive in the UK than in the US. Another bit to mention is that the gear is usually a little bit more expensive in the UK than the US, just because there is the import. Like, a lot of those brands make instruments in the US. So obviously you don't have the import and the shipping. So the investment in gear is usually higher in the UK than in the US. But it depends what instrument you play and what brand. So I didn't gather the exact same data as it's not really relevant. Objectively though, there are two aspects in which the data is considerably more expensive in the US than in the UK. And it is the music degree, right? I said on average $70,000 in the US, while it is $28,000 on average in the UK. And then of course, healthcare as we know it, it's quite different as well. And can be considerably higher. But unless we're talking about education and healthcare, roughly we can say that life and especially rent is higher in the UK than it is in the US. And the salary is a lot less in the UK than in the US. So in order to compare everything, all of the data abroad, like US in 1990, US in 2025 and UK in 2025, I calculated the proportion that the rent is in comparison to the average salary. So we have an average rent, average salary. What's the proportion? So in the 90s in the US, the rent was on average 23% of the average salary. Today, it is 74%. And in London, it is 129%. And well, while gathering information, again, I found another thing I wanted to include in this video while we're talking about income is the gender inequity and the pay gap between female players and male players. And I'm not going to go on about the conditions of being a woman in the industry. I think it's a subject for a completely different video, but it is interesting to talk about this while we're talking about pay. So in the 1990s, women were already underrepresented, as we know, but they were also paid on average 19% less than their male counterparts. So I mentioned in an average salary of $56,982 for men, but for women, it was $46,236. So yeah, that's quite different. And thanks to the UK Census 2023, we also know that today women are paid on average 10% less than their male counterpart still. They are also significantly underrepresented in the higher income group, being only 19% of that group. And this gap is interesting when you know that 14% more women have a degree in music than a male player, and 15% more women have a postgraduate degree, so a master or a PhD, than men. But we cannot see a correlation with their pay. I only brought this up because it's important to know that it was one reality to be a musician in the US in 1990, which was when the industry was quite healthy. Then it is another reality to be a full-time musician in the US in 2025. But it is another reality to be a full-time musician working in the UK in 2025. And it is even another reality to be a woman in this industry today. So it is a completely different reality for a woman working within the UK, i.e. me, to a man working in the US today. Yet, we are both judged on the exact same criteria in the music industry today. And even worse, we are both judged on the same criteria as 1990 case, which is absolutely nonsense. So I hope that this has brought at least some light and some clarity on the average situation of musicians working in the music industry today. So why is this happening? Well, it is worth noting that the cost of living has increased for everybody, not just musicians, of course, and the median salary from the 1990s to today has globally lowered too. However, the decrease observed with the average salary of musician is greater than the overall decrease between median salaries from 1990s and today. But then Dave Weckl, in his interview, tells us,
the other side of that is, and I tell my students this all the time too, because on any level, if you dumb down the industry by selling yourself cheap, you're screwing everybody. And my students are like, well, tell them to call me if you don't want to do it, because I'll do it for $100. And I'm like, no, you won't. I said, no, you won't. I'm not. Yeah. If you're going to say that, I will not recommend you. So you've got to charge what you're worth, man. I mean, it's otherwise we're all screwed.
Although he is 100% right. I totally agree with him. There are way too many musicians out there, either inexperienced, young, and maybe non-professional ones as well, who accept really bad deals in order to have experience or exposure or just the fun, and legitimize bad deals within the whole industry, and then everybody's screwed. However, when we look at it a bit closer, this might actually be due not to the irresponsibility and the lack of value that people have in their craft, but more on the fact that the general public makes no difference on whether you're professional or not, and whether you're experienced or not. Most clients don't seem to make the difference between a professional, educated player with a dude playing on Sunday afternoon with his old mates and just wants to play a gig. If we make no difference, everyone has to lower their pay expectation to, well, that old dude playing on Sunday afternoon with his old mates who just wants to have fun and get paid a little bit. So the main reason to this trend, I would actually say, is because being a professional musician is not recognized as a real job. However, is it the only contributor? Because obviously this only applies to the low end of the industry. Once you get to a higher end of it, then we do make a difference, right? So what are the other contributors? The first cause is obviously streaming. Frankly, I'm just sick of talking about it, so I'm going to spare you the lecture on how the streaming model has screwed the whole industry and resulting in a lot less cash within the music industry, but also devaluing music as an art form and as a product. But if you want to know more about it, I went a bit deeper into this in my video, Has the Music Industry Killed Art?, which I advise you to go and check out. But this industry is, if we have a broader look at this, is basically a pyramid scheme. And as we know, if there is less and less cash within one industry of this model, well, the people at the bottom are going to be the ones having a lot less money and feeling it a lot more. And the people at the bottom of that pyramid are the artists. So the second cause is that you are now disposable. As there is less cash in the music industry, labels, management, and artists find themselves having to cut on costs to sustain the touring. And usually the first thing they think of when they have to cut costs is the band. Why? Well, let's have a look at this. Before, pop artists would need solid players to rely on for a very high standard show. The parts were not necessarily easy, but the pressure was big, and they needed to make sure they could rely on whoever was backing them in the band. So once you found good players, you would make sure to pay them well in order to keep them. Today, it's quite different. First of all, most of it is backing tracks. A lot of pop artists still take like 1 or 2 musicians on stage, usually a guitar player and a drummer, to keep this live feeling and also for the visual and a bit like that live sound to it. So they could easily put the parts of those people on stage in the tracks too, as usually half of the musicians are already on tracks anyway. Furthermore, although you need a musician you can rely on and who is professional, is going to show up on time and so on, the arrangement of pop music today is significantly easier than in the 80s and 90s. especially when we take into account the new technology with in-ear monitors having cues, click tracks, and so on. The pressure is a lot lower than it was back then, and therefore the musical level required to play those gigs is not as high as it was back then. Which means that you're not just disposable, you're also easily replaceable, removing the incentive of a good pay. A third cause worth mentioning is the absence of union actions. I can talk about this for the UK for sure, but from what I understand, the US might also be concerned by this too. Being a musician is one of those very rare professions for which there is no minimum wage being enforced. In fact, we see what it leads to. The average musician is making less than the minimum wage for the UK. This applies for the teaching side of things, but also for the live performing, the recording, and don't let me mention the songwriting, because another point worth mentioning is all of this video is based around the session and teaching work of a musician, but of course being an artist in the band, but being the artist, not the session player, is a completely different reality, and it is much, much, much worse. That's another subject for another video probably. I don't want this to be this depressing. But the worst part about this is that they are musicians' union in the UK, and it would therefore be extremely easy to enforce a minimum wage. They have an indication on their website which of a minimum wage for teaching and also live performances, as well as a list of requirements of conditions under which musicians can teach and perform, but none of it is enforced. I know far too many friends of mine who have shared on social media that they were offered a job which was paid under the minimum wage advised by the musicians union. They complained about it to the employer, saying, no, I will not accept this deal because it is below the minimum wage advised. And what happened is that the employer just gave that contract to someone else who accepted it. And it happens because there is no punishment for the employers giving such bad deals. We blame a lot the people accepting those deals, but we don't blame enough the people offering those deals. And if there is no punishment for them, then there's no incentive to pay decently the musicians you want to hire. It's logical for every single profession, but for musicians, not so much. Although I generally appreciate the Musicians Union in the UK, and I am a member, I just don't understand why there is still no action being taken in terms of enforcement for this minimum wage and a list of requirements under which a musician has to be hired. There is a minimum wage for almost every single profession, but not this. In fact, there is a proof that what I'm saying would make a difference, because musicians playing for West End shows, so theatre shows in the UK, but also orchestras, are very unionized. And we can see that they have a minimum wage in place, they have sick pay, they have paid rehearsals, they have way more security when it comes to the ending the contract and so on. They have some of the most secure job within the industry when it comes to playing an instrument. But the rest of the players don't have this security, don't have this pay, and definitely don't have sick pay or rarely paid rehearsals and so on. So my question is, why? Why is this still not enforced? Is it just the case of musicians union finding this too tricky to enforce? Like, is it just the model that makes it really difficult? I don't think so. I think if you wanted to do something about it, you would. Let's start reporting. We should start to report the people who underpays artists, and they will need to face legal punishments just like for any other job. Or is it because actually being a musician is not considered by the general public as being a profession? And this is probably a subject for another video. Then a last cause I wanted to include in this video is not necessarily a cause for the decline, but more for the general bad pay of musicians throughout the years, lower than the median salary. Let's be clear. If you wanted to be rich, you would probably not be a professional musician, right? Right. Not just it is badly paid, there is also a lack of security. You work antisocial hours. It's usually quite uncomfortable conditions to work under. So the only reason why you would want to be a professional musician is because you are really, really passionate about music. Otherwise, it's not really attractive. And this means that whether or not you'd get paid for it, you would still probably end up at least a part of it. And in fact, you would probably want to get paid just enough to justify just doing this and not needing another job. So the high pay is rarely your number one motivation. It's usually definitely at the bottom of the motivation. It's more the job itself and the playing and your passion, the main motive. And of course, this means that a lot of people accept bad deals too. And because there is less incentive to ask for a fair pay. The whole industry knows that. So the whole industry, who are not performers and not songwriters, they know this about the artist, and of course they're gonna take advantage of it. In conclusion, I think it is time that us musicians start to talk about it. We don't just have to talk about the effect of streaming and AI on our industry. We have to address a much bigger and global issue within this industry. Although guilt-tripping our listeners and our fans into supporting our work and our art in other ways than just streaming it is good, useful to a certain extent, we actually need more official and legal actions taken in order to protect the artists working within this industry. Otherwise, the problems I've mentioned in this video will just keep getting worse, especially with AI coming into play. No one in the industry will have any incentive to sort this out. As artists, we'll have to be the one fighting for this. We should also support each other and not judge each other on whether or not we need another job on the side, as well, we could see that the reality of one person working within the industry as a professional player might not be the same as someone else. But also, as musicians, we need to discuss about this. We need to spread the word, the information. So I invite all of you to share this video, or at least talk about the data I've shared in it, in order to start a conversation and maybe reach some radical changes that might save this profession and might save the industry and the art. We all know that if the artists had to disappear, the society would be the big loser from it. And this industry being filled with extremely talented and motivated and hard-working artists, I am sure that whatever we have to save is worth every single trouble it will take to save it. In the meantime, if you appreciate this content, then please make sure to subscribe, it helps a lot, and share this video, like it, put a little like, it also helps a lot. And thank you for watching the whole thing, and most importantly, keep creating and stay weird.